It is Wednesday, September the 19th, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much, and this is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. I'm the only one that understands that the only issue, the only real issue, is change and where one stands on change. Now, listen carefully. Read carefully. True conservative reads carefully, listens carefully. Very often, the left is trying to bait the right, trying to bait conservatives into making false confessions, baiting them into undercutting their own arguments, etc. I don't know how many times that I've yelled at the radio, Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity or whatever, and screamed at them, no, that's not what they said. Because the Rush or Sean Hannity will claim that the left is trying to say or do something that they're not actually trying to say or do. The left likes to operate subtly and with nuance. What they like to do, what they want to do, is get you to destroy yourself. Everybody thinks that the left is out to destroy capitalism. They're out to destroy the United States of America. Now, do they want to see that happen? Yes. Are they actually want to be responsible for that? No. It's like I said, you can't go to a cocktail party with blood on your hands. It's gauche. Okay? So you get other people to do your dirty work. The best thing to do, instead of murdering somebody, is put them in a position where they commit suicide. Okay? It could be actual suicide. It could be career suicide. Classic example of this is Donald Trump. The right, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, particularly Sean Hannity in this particular case, go out and always saying that if the left gets elected to run the House of Representatives, then their aim is going to be to impeach Donald Trump. Bullshit. It's just not going to happen. That's not the way it's going to work. What they're going to do is constantly threaten to impeach Donald Trump. The whole idea here is to put Donald Trump under so much pressure from the newspapers, from the television, etc., radio, etc., and even live demonstrations, so as to encourage him to do either make some kind of a flaw that's going to get him basically arrested, or basically commits a flaw so bad that he has no other choice but to resign. That's what they really want him to do, is resign. You got to remember how they look at things in terms of ethics. For the left, there is no such thing as ethics the way the rest of us normal people understand it, which is that you give somebody due process, you give them the benefit of the doubt, in other words, you build a case against them, use logic, rhetoric, grammar, and etc. to build their case and convince people with evidence and proof beyond a reasonable doubt, or by preponderance of the evidence, or clear and convincingly that another person is guilty of something. The left doesn't play by those games. They deny reality, deny knowledge, they deny ethics. So how do you proceed from there? How do you convince people? How do you make change if you've denied all the basic mechanisms by which to create change? Simple. You get the other people to do it for you. You put Donald Trump under such pressure that either he can't stand it anymore and he resigns outright, or he commits the fatal mistake. He bungles something so badly that there's no other choice for him politically but to go ahead and resign. Classic example of this is Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was stupid enough to resign. People came to him and said, Mr. President, this is awful, and you may end up getting impeached, and blah, 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 blah. And so Richard Nixon did what? He resigned. So what does that do for Richard Nixon? He's guilty, period. He went out and had himself pardoned by the next president, Gerald Ford. So what? So what? In the court of public opinion, Richard Nixon is guilty as charged, period. That his resignation was tantamount to a confession, that he confesses that he did something wrong. He would have been better to flip these people the bird, and take let them prosecute him and take his chances in a trial in the Senate. Because the flip side of the Richard Nixon argument is Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton did exactly that. People went to Bill Clinton too and said, you might want to consider resigning because looks like you're going to get impeached, and you don't want to do that. It's bad for the party. It's bad for you, etc. Bill Clinton said, "Screw you. They want to impeach me. Let them try." So what happened? He got impeached, and the trial came out in his favor. He was exonerated. Not only that, but it split the Republican Party. The Republicans ate their own. There were several Republicans that were leading the charge for impeachment that ended up losing their seats because the Republican Party refused to support them. I mean, it was really, really contentious time. It split the Republican Party. So, again, and then how does Bill Clinton come out of it? He comes out smelling better than Richard Nixon. He looks better than Richard Nixon by default because he didn't confess to anything, except he did make one confession that cost him his law license. But that's the only one. In terms of his presidency, instead of resigning and in essence confessing that he's done something wrong, he goes to trial and is exonerated, because he can say that now. Everybody, all of his supporters can say the same thing. He's exonerated. So that's what the left wants to do with Donald Trump. They want him to resign because then it's sealed, it's done, it's finished. There's no argument, no debate. He's screwed. Now, Donald Trump is shrewd also. He understands that. Okay, he may not understand it overtly, in other words, be able to explain it to you the way I'm doing it, but somewhere he has that automatic that sense that tells him, no, it's not a good idea. It's like when he caught saying the pussy, grab him by the pussy. Did he resign? A lot of people said, oh, that's it, you're done. You're toast. Get out. You're going to split the party. You're going to turn everything over to the Democrats. Your candidacy is toast. Did he? Did he resign? Did he say, well, I'm going to walk away from this? No, because he knew not only is he then not going to get the presidency, but it's tantamount to a confession that there's something wrong with him, that he's some kind of a bad person. He made a small apology and he moved on. And that's been his style. So I don't believe that the left is going to be able to intimidate him into resigning, but I wouldn't want the left running the House of Representatives for plenty of other reasons, because there's plenty of things I want to see done in terms of, I want to see the president fulfill all of his promises. And it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to get that done if his enemies have control of the House. So anyways, the point is, read carefully, think carefully, listen carefully, because very often the left is not coming out and saying what you think they're saying. They're trying to be subtle and nuanced about it. They want you to think they're saying something in particular when they're not really. So, again, true conservative, listen carefully and read carefully. So today I've got an interesting segment from the Rush Limbaugh show from yesterday, where Rush Limbaugh appears again to get it, to understand, to know what's going on, and yet at the same time doesn't really know or understand. And then after that, there's I've got a new book, and it's called the 10 books that screwed up the world, and 5 that didn't help. And so it's got absolutely fascinating stuff. So stick with me, and when we come back, Rush Limbaugh. Thank you very much, and welcome back. And from the Rush Limbaugh show from yesterday, I'm reading this off, it's a transcript from his app, his Rush Limbaugh app. And I was listening to this on the radio yesterday, and I heard it, and I thought, I've got to talk about this tomorrow when I have my podcast. Okay, so let's get to it. Rush. Now, I don't know. I pointed this out to you frequently when it happens. There's a new phenomenon happening in American journalism. When I say new, it's new to Donald Trump. Trump will tweet something. Trump will say something either at a rally or in the Oval Office. When the AP, Reuters, New York Times, Washington Post reported, they all say, President Trump, without evidence, said whatever he said. President Trump said, without evidence. This is meant to cast doubt and aspersions on what Trump is saying and to make readers believe Trump is lying. And again, this is another case where he's not listening and he's not reading this properly. It's not what he is making assumptions about what it is that they're trying to do. They're simply trying to put pressure on Donald Trump. And again, if they can mount enough pressure on him, they figure they can get him to resign. So far, it hasn't worked. Back to the segment. Well, why isn't this part of the story? Christine Blasey Ford, without evidence, says that Judge Kavanaugh did whatever she says he did back when they were a couple of drunkards in high school. You'll know this, it's very selective. Donald Trump, without evidence, claimed blah, blah, blah. Donald Trump, without evidence today, said that Hispanic unemployment is an all-time record low. Didn't need evidence, but he didn't have it. Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers. But we do not see Christine Blasey Ford without evidence. No, it says the exact opposite. Christine Blasey Ford, and whatever she says, you must believe it. You must believe it. It's not up to her to corroborate anything. How the hell can that be, by the way? If the government or anybody comes to you and you end up in court, do you realize who has to prove it? The people accusing you. It's not up to you to prove your innocence. Now, many times, depending on juries and so forth, that's what defense lawyers seek to do. Find an alternative explanation. So again, he's getting it, but he's understanding, but he's not understanding. First of all, the defense lawyers don't seek necessarily an alternative explanation. They seek to attack the evidence. If there's a witness on the stand, they attack the witness's credibility. They attack the witness's story, try to get the witness to equivocate and say, well, gee, maybe I was wrong, maybe I'm not sure, that kind of thing. Get the witness to undercut their own testimony, that type of thing. But they attack the evidence. Now, if they come up with an affirmative defense, such as somebody else did it, my client can't be guilty because somebody else did it, in that particular case, then they have the burden of proving that somebody else did it. That's what happens in an affirmative defense. But he's noting here again the idea of having evidence. And this is again about arbitrary claims. What this lady is claiming that happened 30 years ago in high school is an arbitrary claim. Now, when you are dealing with arbitrary claims, you don't have to go through all the rigmarole that Rush Limbaugh is now going through, having all this big explanation. It's not up to her to corroborate anything. How the hell can that be? Blah, 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 on and on. All you have to do is say, well, it's an arbitrary claim. There's no evidence to support it, and I get to ignore it. And leave it at that. Keep it short. Because remember, where you're going to probably be confronted is in the left is going to sneak up on you. Your left-wing friends or coworkers or whatever, they're going to sneak up on you. You're going to be at work. You're going to be at the grocery store. You're going to be at the soccer field. Okay, doing something else, and they're going to come up, hey, did you hear that Judge Kavanaugh's been accused? There's a woman that Judge Kavanaugh has raped or forced himself upon. Did you hear about that? See? And you need to be able to come up with a short answer for this. You don't want to sit here and go on and on. You don't have the time like Rush Limbaugh does to spend 10 or 15 minutes going on and on and on a tirade over this. You got to be short, succinct, and to the point. And most of the time, the best way to deal with it is asking questions. Really, when did this happen? How do you know? Are you sure? Those kinds of things. And very often, that's going to stop them in their tracks. And then when you get right down to it, you just say it's an arbitrary claim, and I get to ignore it. Have a nice day. Okay, and then you let them stand there with their mouths open, bubbling and fizzing. So, back to Rush. But it's the government's job, the prosecutors, the accusers, to prove. But how does she get an exemption? How does Christine Blasey Ford get an exemption for having to prove her claim? Now, this is how it happens. Let me read his response to his own question. Well, because she's a Democrat and leftist, and that's just the way the world works for us. No, bull. The reason she gets the pass is because of conservatives and the idiocy of conservatives like Rush Limbaugh. Okay, she gets a pass because conservatives allow her to get a pass. First of all, her claim is arbitrary, so why should she be being given a hearing? Okay, the conservatives run the House. They run this committee, but it's conservatives that said, "Oh well, we're going to have to give her a hearing. We are going to have to invite her out here, and we'll delay Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation so that we can." Investigate this. No, there's no basis on which to conduct an investigation. She's produced zero evidence. Okay. She has as much credibility saying that Kavanaugh attacked her as I do. If I came out and said, oh, guess what? You know what? Kavanaugh attacked me too. Yesterday at the Vaughn store, we were standing in line and he tried to hump me right there. Okay, absent any evidence, it's ridiculous. Okay, you're not going to have a hearing over that. But by having the hearing, they validate what it is that the left is doing. And it's so many Republicans, so many conservatives are scared to death of the left, and they shouldn't be. There's no reason to. All they need to do is stand their ground. The guy that runs this particular committee should be standing up and saying, we're not going to have any investigation until and unless this woman produces evidence to support her claim. Without any evidence, there's no reason to conduct an investigation, because that's the way it would work at a police department. If she went to a police department right now and tried to accuse Judge Kavanaugh of attempted rape, it would go nowhere. Okay, number one, the statute of limitations is gone. And that's another reason for the committee to ignore this. Excuse me, the statute of limitations is long, long gone on this. Number two, as I think it was Rush Limbaugh that correctly pointed out, it isn't a federal issue anyhow. It's a state issue. Okay, so if somebody's going to take up the investigation, it wouldn't be the FBI, it would be a state agency of some sort, police department more than likely. But if she went to the police department and said, hey, skipping, let's just pretend even though the statute of limitations has run on this, that it hasn't. She goes to the police department and says, Mr. Kavanaugh tried to rape me. Okay, what's your evidence? Well, my story. Well, then they're going to go to Mr. Kavanaugh. Okay, she says you tried to rape her. What happened? I don't know what she's talking about. I don't even know who she is. Or I wasn't there. I didn't go to any party. I didn't get drunk. I didn't do any of those things. Then they're going to go back to her and say, well, he says he didn't do it. And she's going to have nothing. No evidence, nothing. So what are they going to do then? Nothing. That's as far as it's going to go. And so anyways, the committee is, by going ahead and having this, allowing themselves to be intimidated by the left, is honoring and creating credibility for the claim. That's how they get this to be a credible claim, is by simply getting the committee to agree to investigate. Once they've done that, then the claim has to be assumed to be credible. Now, Judge Kavanaugh and his supporters are in the awkward position of having to prove a negative. So the left has then successfully switched the burden of proof from trying to prove a positive to trying to prove a negative. And it is impossible to prove a negative. And the harder you try, the guiltier you look. And that's the way the game is played. And Rush Limbaugh doesn't know that. And the reasons that he doesn't know that is because he doesn't learn. He doesn't learn because he thinks that he was born with all the knowledge he's ever going to have. He doesn't see any point to it. Okay, he needs to quit reading Sports Illustrated and quit reading current events and start reading things of more depth. My suggestion is he starts with Ayn Rand's Philosophy Who Needs It. I think another excellent book. Second book would be called The Trivium by Sister Miriam Joseph. So I think some more from Dr. Mortimer Adler would be excellent for him to provide a good, solid, intellectual foundation. And then he wouldn't be making these stupid mistakes. Okay, when I come back, I'm going to be reading from the excerpt from the book, The 10 Books That Screwed Up the World. Okay, thank you very much. So 10 Books That Screwed Up the World, and I've had this book for a while, and it was excellent, because what it shows here is, again, cultural influence. What will happen a lot of times, the way that this will work in terms of influencing our culture and our politics, is a philosopher comes out and writes a book saying that they've got a new philosophical theory. And so then popular writers will then come along and write a book based on this new philosophical theory, write books for the general public, because usually philosophical theories are for other philosophers and whatnot, and highly educated people. So for the regular hoi polloi, you have to have a regular author that's going to come along and write a book that tells the hoi polloi what all this means. And those books then influence our culture. Then as it settles into our culture, it changes our politics. Classic example, the sexual revolution. Or you had, I guess it would be post-Marxism, and the people that came up with the post-Marxist theory that then set the stage for Betty Friedan to write the book called The Feminine Mystique. And then there becomes which is supposedly sets off the quote-unquote sexual revolution. There was no sexual revolution. Never happened. It was a leftist fiction. But everybody went along with it. Everybody went along with this idea that there's a sexual revolution. And you also then started getting books that come out that say how to date in the new world, in this new post-sexual revolution world. How to date, how to marry, how to do this, how to do that. Okay, and so people are now that are going to read that are going to think that there are things going on in our culture that aren't, and think, oh, I'm behind the times, I need to get with it, I need to change. So then they change their attitudes, they change their beliefs, and then the next time they go into the voting booth, guess what? So anyways, that's what a lot of what this book is about, is the books, some of the most fundamental books and how they've affected society, and why they're wrong. Very few people, as a matter of fact, this is the only guy that I've read that actually comes out and critiques these books and says this is why they're full of crap. And when you think about it, it's fairly obvious. Anyhow, the introduction. Ideas have consequences. Ta-da! There is nothing so absurd, quipped the ancient Roman philosopher-statesman Cicero, that it can't be said by a philosopher. Unfortunately, philosophers' absurdities aren't limited to classroom sophistry and eccentric speculations. They make their way into print and are thereby released upon the public. They can be and have been as dangerous and harmful as deadly diseases. And with deadly diseases, people can pick up deadly ideas without even noticing. These ideas float, largely undetected, in the intellectual air we breathe. If we take a good, hard, sober look at the awful effects of such deadly ideas, we can come to only one conclusion. There are books that have really screwed up the world, books that we would have been better off without. This should not come as a shock, except to those who don't believe that ideas have consequences. Thomas Carlyle, the eminent Scottish essayist and sometime philosopher, was once scolded at a dinner party for endlessly chattering about books. Ideas, Mr. Carlyle, ideas, nothing but ideas. To which he replied, there once was a man called Rousseau who wrote a book containing nothing but ideas. The second edition was bound in the skins of those who laughed at the first. Carlyle was right. Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote a book that inspired the ruthlessness of the French Revolution, and even more destructive things after that. Common sense and a little logic tell us that if ideas have consequences, then it follows that bad ideas have bad consequences. And even more obvious, if bad ideas are written down in books, they are far more durable, infecting generation after generation and increasing the world's wretchedness. I submit, then, that the world would be a demonstrably better place today if the books we're about to discuss had never been written. It was possible half a century ago, and even 20 years ago among the academic elite, to maintain that Marxism was a positive force in history. But since the protective cover has been blown off the Soviet Union, and China's has at least been torn, no one can look at the tens of millions of rotting corpses revealed and conclude anything other than this. If the Communist Manifesto had never been written, a great deal of misery would have been avoided. The same is true of Hitler's Mein Kampf and the other books on the list, even when the carnage is sometimes of a more subtle and different sort. What then? Shall we have a book burning? Indeed not. Such a course of action is indefensible, if only for environmental reasons. As I learned long ago, the best cure, the only cure, once the really harmful books have multiplied like viruses through endless editions, is to read them. Know them forward and backward. Seize each one by its malignant heart and expose it to the light of day. That is just what I propose to do in the following pages. Part 1. Preliminary Screw-Ups. Chapter 1. The Prince. Hence it is necessary to a prince, if he wants to maintain himself, to learn to be able not to be good. From Niccolò Machiavelli, 1469 to 1527. You've probably heard the term Machiavellian and are aware of its unsavory connotations. In the Thesaurus, Machiavellian stands with such ignoble adjectives as double-tongued, two-faced, false, hypocritical, cunning, scheming, wily, dishonest, and treacherous. Barely a century after his death, Niccolò Machiavelli gained infamy in Shakespeare's Richard III as the murderous Machiavel. Almost 500 years later, he wrote his most famous work, The Prince. Almost 500 years after he wrote his most famous work, The Prince, his name still smacks of calculated ruthlessness and cool brutality. Despite recent attempts to portray Machiavelli as merely a sincere and harmless teacher of prudent statesmanship, I shall take the old-fashioned approach and treat him as one of the most profound teachers of evil the world has ever known. His great classic, The Prince, is a monument of wicked counsel, meant for rulers who had shed all moral and religious scruples and were therefore daring enough to believe that evil, deep, dark, and almost unthinkable evil, is often more effective than good. That is really the power and the poison of The Prince. In it, Machiavelli makes thinkable the darkly unthinkable. When the mind is coaxed into receiving unholy thoughts, unholy deeds soon follow. Niccolò Machiavelli was born in Florence, Italy on May 3, 1469, the son of Bernardo di Niccolò di Bonensegna and his wife Bartolomea de Nelli. It is fair to say that young Machiavelli was born into wicked times. Italy was not a single nation then, but a rat's nest of intrigue, corruption, and conflict among the five main warring regions: Florence, Venice, Milan, Naples, and the Papal States. Machiavelli witnessed the greatest hypocrisy in religion, including cardinals and popes who were nothing more than political wolves in shepherd's clothing. He also knew firsthand the cold cruelty of kings and princes. Suspected of treason, Machiavelli was thrown into jail. To elicit his, quote, confession, unquote, he was subjected to a punishment called the strappato. His wrists were bound together behind his back and attached to a rope hanging from a ceiling pulley. He was hauled up in the air, dangling painfully from his arms, and suddenly dropped back to the ground, thereby pulling his arms out of their sockets. This delightful process of interrogation was repeated several times. Machiavelli knew evil, but then so did many others, in many other times and places. There's no shortage of wickedness in the world, and no shortage of witnesses to it. What makes Machiavelli different is that he looked evil in the face and smiled. That friendly smile and a wink is The Prince. The Prince is a shocking book, artfully shocking. Machiavelli meant to start a revolution in his readers' souls, and his only weapons of revolt were his words. He stated boldly what others had dared only to whisper, and then whispered what others had not dared even to think. Let's look at chapter 18 for a taste. Should a prince keep faith, honor in his promises, work above board, be honest, that kind of thing? Well, Machiavelli muses, everyone understands that it is laudable for a prince to keep faith and to live with honesty. Everyone praises the honest ruler. Everyone understands that honesty is the best policy. Everyone knows the countless examples in the Bible of honest kings being blessed and dishonest kings cursed, and ancient literature is filled with tributes to virtuous sovereigns. But is what everyone praises truly wise? Are all good rulers successful rulers? Even more important, are all successful rulers good? Or does goodness for a ruler merely mean being successful, so that whatever leads to success, no matter what everyone may say, must be good by definition? Well, says Machiavelli, let's see what actually happens in the real world. We see by experience in our times that the princes who have done great things are those who have taken little account of faith. Keeping your word is foolish if it brings you harm. Now, quote, if all men were good, this teaching would not be good. But because they are wicked and do not observe faith with you, you also do not have to observe it with them, unquote. So I'm going to leave it right there for the time being. It's a fairly long chapter. We'll cover some more of it next time. But I did want to say that, again, this is the groundwork for pragmatism, the so-called American philosophy of pragmatism. The ends justify the means, or that all actions should be judged by their results. So, and he's going to later on go on into some very specific, detailed cruelty and atrocities as an example. So, but we will pick up on this one again next time. And but in the meantime, next segment here, I'm going to lighten things up a little bit with a joke or two from the New York City cab driver's joke book when I come back. Thank you very much. So the New York City Cab Driver's Joke Book is written by Jim Peach, a real New York City cabbie. He's heard them all, from business people, unemployed laborers, Wall Street lawyers, prostitutes, writers, tourists, drug dealers, and lovers, all from the backseat of his cab as he makes his way around New York City. Jim always asks his customers for their best jokes, and here are his favorites. More than 400 clean jokes, dirty jokes, ethnic jokes, religious jokes, dirty Ernie jokes, jokes about musicians, bartenders, hookers, everyone. The New York City Cab Driver's Joke Book also includes true stories about Jim's writers and original illustrations by Jim himself. The cabbie with the best collection of jokes in New York City. Oops. So, two Martians are flying through space and they're running low on rocket fuel. They happen to be passing near Earth, and one of them says, "Hey, there's life on that planet down there. Let's go down and try to get some fuel." They fly down, and as luck would have it, they land in the middle of the desert in Nevada. They walk around for a while until they come to a road. After following the road for a couple of miles, they come upon an old deserted gas station that has an old-fashioned pump with a round top. One of the Martians walks up to the gas pump, pulls out his ray gun, and says, "All right, Earthling, give me some fuel or I'm going to blast you." The other Martian says to his friend, "Listen, man, don't hassle this guy. He's a bad dude. Let's get out of here." "Nah," says the Martian, "I can handle him." Then turning to the pump again, he says, "I'm giving you one last chance. Give me some fuel or I'll blast you." When the pump doesn't say anything, the Martian fires his ray gun at it. There's a huge explosion, and the Martians are blown into the sky and land 2 miles away in the desert. The Martian with the ray gun looks at his friend and says, "Wow, you were right. That cat was a bad dude. How did you know he was so mean?" "Well," says the other Martian, "I figured that any guy that could wrap his dick around his neck 3 times and then stick it in his ear has got to be bad." And on that, we come to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. I thank you for listening, and until next time, have a great day.